Good evening, and welcome very, very much to Conversations, where I'm pleased to welcome to the program tonight two people who can talk about the current situation, political and longer-term view of the situation in the United States and on a broader world scale. I'd like to introduce them, get right into the program. And on my far left is Viola Plumer. She's with the December 12th movement here in New York City.
Yes.
And Viola, welcome very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you very much.
Glad you were able to get here into the studio from your busy schedule. On my immediate left is Reverend Lawrence Lucas. He's with the Archdiocese of New York. And Reverend Lucas, welcome very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you.
Wonder if I might, you two work together in a certain sense in this December 12th movement, and I wonder maybe, Father Lucas, maybe you could talk a little bit about it if you could. When did it get started, and then maybe that could be a jump-off point for us to talk about politics and some of the developments of this country and what's going on in this world in a broader context.
December 12th movement, as it is now, began as the December 12th coalition, and we began coming together particularly in terms of the question of police brutality and murdering of our youngsters particularly, although they don't mind, they spread it around to grandmothers and everything else. It then began to gel over several issues. One was the beating up of 5 Africans and 4 Latino brothers in the Rockland County Jail when some of the officers, although their regular uniform could suffice as KKK, but some of them even put on the sheet and went in and beat up on these brothers. And we began to see that this needed something more than just one organization, but a coalition, and that's the name. And then at that time, the Tawana Brawley thing came up, and we were calling to that until other folks took it over for a different agenda. And we've had a number of things in the city. Among the Day of Outrages was originally a December 12th thing, particularly that most important one of '88 and then subsequent one, although other folks have capitalized on the name and some of the slogans. So fundamentally, what it is about is a serious understanding of the difference between the civil rights and the human rights movement, and the difference between a reformist approach and a revolutionary approach. And I suppose that is why the December 12th movement, particularly its leadership, have been brand terrorists, while those who are seeking to get positions to be the white man's top Negro in this country or in this state, they survive. They're not vamped upon as the other situation, because nobody minds when you're coming to beg for rights that God already gave you as a human being, because it means first you do not believe in your own humanity, so you have to get rights which others enjoy as a human being from other human beings, because you're not one. And they recognize, they have no problem with the integrationists, the reformists, and the civil rights movement. It's with the other, the revolutionary, the human rights, the serious human rights, while some folks use those terms interchangeably, they're not. And this is basically what the December 12th movement is all about.
Yeah, and just sort of reflecting the conditions which just seem to be getting, in a certain sense, worse and worse as we begin to go along. The pressure's just mounting all the time, right? I mean,
no question about it. The increase of the attacks by the New York City Police Department, by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Joint Terrorist Task Force, the attacks on people who they say have the human right to struggle to change the quality of their life, those attacks increase. And they increase at a rate that is commensurate to the decline of the imperial United States, you see? And those of us who, as Father Lucas said, struggle for human rights, you know, take those issues, police brutality, the issue of homelessness, the issue of political prisoners, right? The illegal entry of this country into other people's countries to establish regimes, a la Panama.
Amen.
So that we, in the struggle for our human rights, certainly did not let it rest with our support for those kind of movements abroad, but indeed we struggled here in New York City, in New York State, and in the United States.
Right in the belly of the beast, as it were, in a certain sense. It was Malcolm, wasn't it, Malcolm X, who was going to take the United States to task in the name of human rights before the United Nations, wanted to call the United Nations to the attention of human rights abuses in this country. He was right in that.
Exactly.
And it should be done, right?
Absolutely.
And instead, what's happening in the United States is running the United Nations like a branch of the State Department.
Yeah, well, that was
practically,
one of the
like,
differences, although we should still do it. When Malcolm was talking about the United Nations, at least it gave the facade that it would be able to intervene on the behalf of human rights. Now, of course, it's simply another puppet or a department of George Bush or the United States. So
he has more power there than he does in his own Congress, I think.
Exactly. Again, to add on what Viola said, that this attack is in the media, every place you look. In many instances, they use privatization. Now, when they talk about privatization of the prison system, well, what else is the prison system except on the backs of primarily young Black and Latino males? Other folks are able to make a fairly decent living. Other folks make millions off of it in terms of contracts.
Yeah, sure.
Now, when you talk about privatization, what you're simply saying is giving this opportunity to fewer people to make more money, and without any accountability, because once you take it out of the hands of government, then it's a private enterprise, and therefore the accountability and the opportunity for even a facade of the people control goes out the window.
Yeah, we have a little bit of a control over the political process. The economic process, we have practically no control in terms of the broader context.
So when you make such things like prisons and schools and so forth, quote, using that nice-sounding word privatization, you're simply saying not only giving a few opportunity to make more money, but taking even the semblance of control out of the hands of the people.
Yeah, now you work at Rikers Island, don't you? I mean, am I correct in that?
Yes,
you're in there with the fellows that are in great trouble. And is it true, I read in the paper the other day, that we now have something on the order of 1 million people incarcerated in our jail system and prison system in this country?
The United States leads the world. It certainly is behind the world in morality, but it leads the world in terms of incarceration.
Yes.
There are more African people incarcerated in this country than even in South Africa.
Good God. Good God. Higher percentage than any other country in the world, true to say?
Yeah.
That bad. And the conditions are appalling.
Yes.
And they're growing all the time. You monitor that on a regular basis at Rikers, right?
Well, I'm not supposed to say I monitor it on the road, but obviously I do.
No, well, you keep track of what's going on.
You have to keep your eyes open and see what's happening, because remember, unlike so many of the other chaplains, particularly the females, very few, if any, live in a community where they would have been in touch with these people before or after incarceration. So we have the problem where many of them come from those communities in Nassau and Suffolk, where the only time they see black males, more than 2 at a time, is on the television set. Then you put them in a position where they're in a controlling, which is what racism is all about, that white must always be in a controlling position, in a controlling position to do favors and never have to think about except outside of those 4 walls. Whereas when you get those of us who live in the community where these people come from, who, when they release, you're coming back to your own community. So the kinds of things that others may be able to do and get by with, some of them very questionable, that you have to bear in mind that, hey, these folks, I'll be passing in a block, whereas they will not be passing them in a block. So it's a whole different ballgame and a whole different concern. They're more likely to be my relatives and friends than the other folks.
Yeah, right. And it gets, and again, this is another condition that gets worse all the time.
Worse all the time.
And the conditions that they're going to come back to get worse.
Exactly.
Unemployment rates and the inability for people to find employment in a normal mainstreaming kind of way and so forth. This situation becomes worse with time.
Particularly as you look at the upstate situation, the prison system becomes an employment opportunity for white farmers in Rockland and Orange and those counties who have been driven off the farm due to Reagan and Bush. Great administration of decontrolling, which means allow the rich man to take over all these mama-papa farms. So they have to provide employment for these. So you notice where the prisons are being built.
And they're clamoring upstate for more prisons.
For more prisons.
Clamoring for more. They want some of that good cheap labor or something, right?
You know, for us, though, the issue is always to look at the totality of what's happening. Because you see, when we start to take one piece at a time, we negate the total situation. The United States government, its administration, its political economic system is no longer capable of providing a adequate quality of life for all the people.
Yeah.
What does that mean for Africans born in this country? That means that the quality of their life must, at the same rate, decrease. You see, in every sphere. That means that if there is a 7% unemployment rate for white people, it is going to be 14% for black people, and it is going to be 40% for young black men.
Unconscionable.
You see?
Absolutely.
What does that mean? That means the development of a, quote, underground economy. What has this system made or laid the basis for that economy? It's drugs. No question about it. Drugs in this country, in New York, according to the Wall Street Journal, was $8 billion in the 1980s. You see? So
New York.
And that's New York.
That's New York alone.
New York. And so that what happens is that these young black people, right, are forced into this, quote, underground economy. That serves two purposes. It serves for this country to have an immediate illegal cash flow, okay? Because these young people get this real quick money, and $20,000 is circulated to 5 car dealers in a month. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, right.
So that you get an immediate influx of cash. Secondly, they are going to be arrested, okay? That's going to now provide the jobs for the upstate people who are unemployed.
That's right.
There's going to be a clamoring for more police.
Yes.
You
There
see?
has been Mr. Clinton even just said he's going to give us 100,000
More
That
police.
was one of his,
I mean, it's that kind of situation.
Police are going to solve social problems when they're part of the big problem themselves. But you see, there's nothing unique about this.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you before, because you said Bush and Reagan made it worse, but it's intractable. Gunnar Myrdal wrote about this. Other people have written about this. It seems to be intractable in this country.
That's one of the many serious problems with greedy, racist capitalism to begin with. You have to have a different strata economically and therefore socially and politically speaking too. And what is happening now is capitalism is now, I believe, is on its deathbed. It's fighting anxiously to maintain. And what you're going to get is more and more money concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer to the disadvantage of more and more.
Well, y'all print that. And I can say it right here, if you don't mind, right now. They put out a magazine, a newspaper, really fine, recommended, and so forth. It's called, Arm the Masses, right? This is the newspaper they all put out, right?
Right.
And everything like that. And you had an article right in here that showed, and took it off the New York Times, that showed, I had showed it myself, it was published from the New York Times, income gain of the 1980, from 1977 to 1989, 77% of pre-tax income gain went to the upper 1% of the population, and the lower percentage of the population lost.
Right.
More and more concentration at the top, fewer and fewer, more and more people that are just being left out in terms of this economy, to the point where it's reaching boiling point.
No
it's reaching, as you said, death throes, perhaps, or it has its own contradiction, and yet it just keeps rolling along like Old Man River in a certain kind of way.
And unfortunately, the vast majority are so politically unsophisticated that they will be quite willing to buy, and you will find this being implied both in both halves of the same coin, the Bush and the Clinton, that the reason for all of this is the poor black and Latinos on welfare.
Oh, that's the fault of it all. Right?
Yes, that's the fault of it all. And many people
Yeah.
buy into that nonsense.
Oh, yeah, it's scapegoating.
And
Yeah,
anything that apparently is put out from high places, this country buys.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Yeah,
The name of the newspaper, it's very interesting because we chose that name.
Yes?
Because the question of what is power, what is a real armament, is information. It is a clear, unbiased set of facts that is observable and provable. We quote from the New York Times Because, in fact, if Arm the Masses did the analysis and laid it out, then people would be skeptical, you see?
Yeah.
But the New York Times has to, because it's observable. You know, in the communities in which I live and work, it is crystal clear to the people who live there that they are poorer now than they had been the year before or the year before. And tomorrow they will be poorer than today.
Yeah.
You see, and they're clear about that.
Yeah.
The struggle for us in this country, though, is how do you get that information to the masses? How do people in simple language read and understand that?
Yeah.
That's why we put out Arm the Masses. That's why we call it Arm the Masses.
Right.
This has to be about guns and stealth bombers, et cetera, because they miss the point. Information is key.
Absolutely.
Knowledge is
just
power.
to understand the reality.
Absolutely.
Just to understand the reality is
Absolutely.
right there.
And that's the motion forward.
Yeah.
Because the reality exists. The objective conditions of our existence exist
unacceptable.
and exist as a fact.
Yeah, right.
The illusions notwithstanding. The vote, Clinton, Bush, Quayle, who's that other one?
Gore.
Gore.
Yeah.
Right. Vote.
All in and
Throw,
scramble
pick
eggs.
out two of them. And we're going to have a, quote, change.
Yeah.
Pick out 1.5, and we'll have a change. Let's throw up Jesse Jackson, and we'll have a change.
Yeah, well, now
or
there
perhaps
is-
Al Sharpton, and we'll have a change. You see what I'm saying? It's a trick that this kind of system is a master at. They've mastered the
Propaganda.
smoke and mirror
Yeah, smoke and mirrors.
propaganda.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
own the media, you see, and the media exists to and make their money to the degree that this kind of system exists and make money. So that, you know, they're not going to now say, hold it, folks. Look at the economic program of Gore and Clinton, Bush and Quayle, Reagan and Bush, Carter and whoever his person was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's look at this. Let's go back to the 1930s and trace the, quote, change in the condition of the lives of the mass of people, regardless to whether Frick or Frack was president.
Yes, right.
You see what I'm saying? That the media is not going to do that. The media is going to talk about whether or not George Bush had a tryst with somebody, or Clinton, or Gore, or Barbara is not talking to George Jr. You know, I mean, they're not going to get to the essence of things to lay out in real terms the difference in the two programs.
Yeah, or for anyone within the normal dialectic of political, exchange and the established political system to lay out a true alternative on the order that is required given the failures that seem to be systemic to the system itself.
Right.
Unless you're totally independent of the process, don't care who you put in that White House, there cannot be and there will not be any change.
Right.
Let's face it, we talk about the power of the president. The president is simply the stooge of the 5% that controls 85% of the wealth of this country.
Yeah.
And all of the agencies and institutions work. I'm glad Viola brought out the meaning of arm the masses, maybe to put some of the idiots in the FBI and the local police at rest, that while we have no opposition to arming for self-defense, but what we're talking about is arming with information.
Yeah,
See,
right.
Anytime black folks use the term arm, these folks get excited.
Yeah, right,
like a bunch of chickens without a head.
Yeah. Well, when things get to be, you've got to protect your babies. You've got to protect yourself against that. And there were some people who said there is no sense in allowing an unrelenting kind of attack coming down upon you and those very, very close to you. You do at a certain point in the name of manhood, personhood, human rights, or whatever. You have to be able to defend yourself.
No
and that's
question
something that has to be
about
done. It might involve something like
Yes.
arm or
Fundamental-
something like a physical
Exactly.
reaction to the injustices that are just
No
conti-
question
continuing.
about it.
Fundamental to Catholic
Yeah.
theology, and I mentioned
Or to
Catholic
human
simply
nature,
because
perhaps,
I'm
in
a
a
priest,
certain-
that
yeah.
it's taught that we have a natural, God-given right to self-defense when we are unjustly attacked.
Hmm. And when the attack becomes, and again, like as you say, systematic, or like you said, Viola, that the situation is worse than it was and can be perceived only as getting worse yet into the future, is a condition that is going to leave little ground for people but to start thinking about some sort of
Yeah.
a way of
Change.
defending and fundamental
Exactly.
change. Yeah.
And you
Right.
bring it out by implication, that is, we're not simply talking about individual defense against an individual attack, but
Right.
you're talking about groups' defense against societal, systematic, and institutional attacks.
Absolutely, yeah.
And anybody who are victimized by this, who do not see the need for confronting this avalanche against people of color primarily and poor people,
Right.
not only in this country, around the world, has got to be blind.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because it's not only in this country. Obviously, we do have that. It's a seemingly intractable kind of thing as far as the less advantaged people that have traditionally been so, and that. But it also does carry out, doesn't it, on a world scale, that this country seems to have no philosophy, no system that allows it to relate to the people, the less advantaged people, on the world
Worldwide.
scale.
Oh, it does relate.
And it makes a moral dilemma of the highest proportions, because it is, after all, this country which has the power, probably uniquely so, to in a certain sense, render the habitat incapable of the continuation of the human species. We are
Exactly.
so tremendously powerful, and we don't seem to have the moral responsibility that ought go with that
power.
power,
Well, we
particularly
never-
in this unipolar world we're
Exactly.
supposedly celebrating.
We never had a moral concept of a country, and that's why our power is based on the ability to destroy human lives, to destroy the entire planet. That's what the United States power has. It has no moral power whatsoever.
No.
Its economic power, whatever that was,
Yeah.
is fastly disappearing. But the United States banks upon the power to destroy. And when you bank only upon that, well, then you're next.
To destroy, and by inclination to intimidate,
To intimidate.
and to beat into submission,
submission.
any kind of resistance
Exactly.
to injustice that is
Because that's
inherent.
precisely
right.
what's happening in the United Nations at this point.
Yeah.
As you know, we are preparing to take a petition to the General Assembly this September.
Yeah.
And the petition, very simply, in as many terms as we can put it, is saying we must, Africans born in this country, 40 million of us,
Oh, yeah.
must be heard at the United Nations, that we must take to the world the charges of human rights violations that have been persistent and consistent since we were kidnapped and brought here. That we have some legitimate issues in terms of human rights violations. First and foremost, reparations.
All right.
Reparations. We have the right to self-determination, that is a human right, and 40 million people have a right to self-determination. We have a right to dispel from our communities and our nation this imposition of a culture that is so vile and so violent that it disrupts, the development of Africans born here and trying to develop.
Yeah.
That we in fact charge genocide.
Yeah, yeah.
No question about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And that the world body, as intimidated as it is at this point, as dependent as it is on the military and economic might through the World Bank and through the International Monetary Fund and through all of the world agencies that fund and grant to the developing countries, the countries of the South, that notwithstanding, they must take a position on the condition of the peoples that we talk about, because it cannot continue to exist and ignore that the conditions under which we live here in the United in the United States, and that it must challenge the hypocrisy that the United States, spreads around the world. And in so doing, as we see it, therein lies their protection. You see, that Panama must be brought to them in concrete terms, that the foreign policy that gave rise to their intervention in another country, kidnapping the president of that country,
Amazing.
and bringing him here for trial,
and insisting that our right,
to do so.
our writ should run in all the world.
In all the world.
And I mean, I don't know what happened to international law or to the concept of sovereignty of nation or anything of that sort, but that our writ should run in all the world in order to, like with Libya now, they want to hand over 2 innocent people to us.
Right.
It must be like a sacrifice to Kong or something that they're asking them to do to us.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're asking them to perform toward the United States, and it can't go on. But if we look at domestic politics, and we're in a presidential election year, obviously. We have the Republicans, we have Mr. Bush and so forth. Then we have the Democrats and the Democratic Leadership Council and Mr. Gore and they seem to me to have, in a certain sense, tilted or put their whole direction toward the upwardly mobile middle class peoples, and seem to have, in their approach, written off the less advantaged people within our society.
About it.
I mean, openly and consciously and directly saying that's the way we're going to get elected, and a pox on those who are less advantaged in our
they're
society.
not even trying to disguise it in the way was it Richard Nixon or Ronald Reagan who used the expression benign neglect.
Yeah.
Right.
But they're not even trying to disguise it now, and you could tell that what a choice you have between Bush and Clinton. Here you have Clinton again in full support of Bush's foreign policy.
Yeah, he's to the right. He's to the right.
I still hear commentators. So what else is his foreign policy except the bully boy mentality?
Yeah, absolutely.
That all of y'all have a right to do what we tell you to do.
Yeah, that's right.
That's about what it's all about.
Yeah, the powerful
you have a
will
right
do.
to have the government that we say is okay for you. You say.
Yeah, right. Their writ should run in all the world. It's like post-industrial
and you call
feudalism.
that a foreign policy.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, it's so ingrained that even in more ridiculous things you see it. I thought the Olympics was a trip, to see the cream of the crop of our professional basketball teams go over and beat the pants off of the best amateurs of it. And we say, hey, how wonderful and how great we are. That's like Muhammad Ali in his prime beating up on some amateur from Germany or someplace or from Nigeria. And everybody's saying, isn't that wonderful? We won.
Yeah, right, of course, Or the horror of Iraq, where we just bulldozed people and buried people alive. And this tremendously... this display of military might and so forth, and callousness toward... Or we can see a United Nations fretting, perhaps justifiably so, about Bosnia, and allowing that situation to continue in Somalia.
But you see, they could be very circumspect when it comes to European countries. They don't jump in with the same gusto and the same destruction
That's
as
the point I'm trying to make.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
With people of color.
Yeah, right.
You see, so Iraq, wipe them all out. Bosnia, well, now we got to be very careful, because we don't want to blah, 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 blah. And the hypocrisy is so patent.
And it's so obviously Eurocentric, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Eurocentric.
Absolutely.
And trilateralist-centric world that we live in.
No question about it.
And it can't be allowed, and we sit there and we say this and so forth, and we can try a petition to the UN, as you say, and it's obviously good. The position is in there, the UN is in their back pocket, the leadership of.
Right.
And yet, I do believe, don't you, I think that there is, we've had demonstrated, we were talking about it before, that there is among not only some of the poor and the poorest of our country, but even among some of those who are in the middle and in the upper group, we had this phenomenon of a Mr. Perot, who announced on the television one day that he was thinking of running for president as an alternative to the status quo elements of our political process. And there was this massive rush of people who claimed fundamental disaccord with the system as it is set up. 5% of the people said they felt the United States was fundamentally off course. There is a widespread, beyond let's just say New York City or some of the worst sections of our society, a widespread sense of discontent with business as usual. Don't you believe?
Absolutely.
I mean,
when we talk about
beyond just people of color and so forth.
Exactly.
when we talk about that the present political economic system can no longer provide the quality of life for the masses of people, surely we are talking about worst hit in that. It's African Americans, it's Latinos, is the indigenous.
Native Americans.
But that does not mean that we are the sole mass. You see? Yeah. We talk about in those statistics in the New York Times, you're talking about 1% of 250 million people?
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah. You're talking about a middle sector, and that middle sector is relative to the poor sector. It's not relative to the richest sector. And what that means is, as 1 out of 4 young black men are unemployed and in the prison system, you go up the ladder to, quote, this middle sector, and this middle sector has maybe 1 out of 8, but it still has 1 out of a percentage. That unemployment, when you talk about tens of millions of people being unemployed, certainly Africans, Latinos, indigenous Americans, Indians. But you're also talking about millions upon millions of white working class people, and working class from every strata.
That's right.
So that relationship is not directed toward if you look at classical economic terms, the middle class is in relationship to the rich.
Yeah.
No, the middle class is in relationship to the poor. You see, because they're getting more impoverished as that class shrink.
The middle class itself is.
Yeah, of
Yes,
course.
yes. And that's an important point, you see, because while we talk about the discontent, one of the things we have to bear in mind that many people are discontented for the wrong reasons, very often selfish reasons, and that the solutions may very well be the end justify the means, and as long as I get mine, I'm not concerned about what's happening. And that's why it's so important, again, to give that strata of the middle class falling down into the poor class the notion that this is happening to you because of the welfare loafers. You see, and they don't realize that the vast majority of people on welfare are white folks. So that's, again, you're arriving at two things. You're having a attack on a class, an attack on a race, because you have confused the people as to what the nature and the cause of the discontent is, and also what the solution may be.
But what it might be leading to conditions which could be, because you said earlier, revolutionary rather than evolutionary, it might well be leading to pressures that call for. This isn't our Declaration of Independence, does
right.
it?
Absolutely.
The government
Yes,
becomes
it is.
no longer meeting the
Yes,
needs.
we don't
they have
read
the,
that
they
It
have
is
the
their duty.
responsibility to
It is
revolt.
their
Absolutely.
duty and
It
responsibility.
is their
Am I
duty.
correct in that? Am I
You're
correct?
correct.
That's what
But we don't read
white
that
people
part,
said, and so it
And,
must
and
be.
we don't have very many people saying that because people don't want to think, and they want to think, as all of our economists say, we're going to come out of this and everything is fine, this historical continuum. It might take something more than just a business as usual
And they also
attitude.
want to think it will be solved by having these repressive bills being introduced that if you're on welfare, they call it the dole. They didn't call it the dole for Lee Iacocca and Chrysler.
That's the point I want to talk about.
George Bush's son.
Or the
they don't
savings
call it
and
Dale.
loan. The
They don't
savings and
right,
loan.
savings and loan. Or they don't call it the dole. But what they would like to see, the kinds of things I think was introduced in New Jersey, where folks who are have to force to accept jobs, and whatever jobs at slave labor.
That's like indentured slavery.
Yeah,
Yes.
in fact, much of the prison system is indentured slavery because folks are performing functions which, if they were not in jail, they'd be getting a decent wage, but inside the jail system, they get peanuts.
And and we also have coming, these tremendous technologically productive capabilities now.
Yes.
I hear of a factory in Japan where they make television sets that are really very high quality, things that anybody would want to have, and you'd want to have those, and it's all being done by robots. There's not a single human being in this factory.
Yeah.
We have jobs that they talk about we create in this country. We have, I don't know how many millions of people who work near minimum wage.
That's
Yes.
right.
We even have a class of people in this country who are fully employed homeless.
Yes.
Exactly.
Fully employed homeless, and
Homeless.
they can't earn a living at that.
Exactly.
Right.
So that the traditional doling out of some of the wealth of the overall economy through these jobs
Right.
isn't going to work when the ownership is of those robots and all the other kinds of technological systems are held in the hands of 1 or 5% of the
Right.
population.
Well, and the robots
It's
don't have
free-
to go to the
it's-
bathroom, don't drop out for a smoke,
That's
don't
right.
get a lunch hour. Or
None of those
any
things. Don't have to worry about it. It's a lot. It's easier for.
And don't unionize. And then on the other side of that, you have where even after you rape all the resources of countries like Haiti and you try to do it in Mexico, now it's becoming a gold mine because these large corporations closing down plants in this country, opening up in those other places. Why? Where you could pay somebody in a week what you would have to give a worker here in an hour or a day.
Yeah, they just signed that
So,
North America,
yeah.
the Free Trade Association with Mexico,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's going to just open that right up to that so that they'll be able to do that. The labor unions, Caterpillar caved in.
Yes.
The organization of the labor union movement itself seems to have lost all of its gusto or ability to fight. So it leaves the people against these 5, 10, let's give them 15, 20% of the upper people who own all of the capital and the wealth and so forth, incredible power over us. It's like a certain kind of post-industrial feudalism that is emerging with overlords and barons and castles and king capital is what we all bow down to.
Which in every situation like that, within that milieu, is that system pregnant with people who are going to revolt.
All right, revolt.
No
right.
question about it.
Yeah, right. At a certain point, you can only push so much.
So much.
And see, when we talk about it, when we expose the hypocrisy, when we
In-arm the masses.
In-arm the masses.
Right.
When we expose the hypocrisy and in-arm the masses
Right,
in our street demonstrations, in our challenge to the UN, because that's what that is. That is a challenge. That is another medium of exposure. That's what it is, to expose the contradictions. And we do that because we are crystal clear that the masses make history.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you know, it appears as if the 1% is all powerful and they have everything at their
Gigantic
disposal,
Goliath,
and
huh?
they
Yeah.
right. It's a myth. Really, you know, Mao Zedong once said that capitalism in the form of the United States was a paper tiger. Well, that's very true. That's very true, because there is no situation where tens of millions of people in a particular country and then hundreds of millions of people around the world
Amen. Yeah.
are going to continue
exactly.
to live in the wretchedness of conditions set upon them by the United States.
Which keeps getting worse.
Absolutely.
And by the nations of the world. And yet we do have this situation where the Soviet Union and the possible countervailing force to the unipolar power of the United States has fallen down.
Right.
We don't have that now. So the United States is free to stride the world unencumbered in a certain sense.
Except this is the era of the masses.
The leader
This
of
is
the
era of the
leadership element of country after country can fight not fast enough to kiss the hem of United States power
Yeah.
and to bow down to that. Moloch.
And
And yet the masses of the world around the world, in the Arab world, in other parts of the world and so forth, are in opposition to their own governments and to the broader trilateral governments that run this world in larger dimensions than we would even like to think. This is a worldwide pattern.
Yes,
and
it
one of the
is.
ironies, of course, is the fact that here I hear during the election verbiage and rhetoric and nonsense George Bush was responsible for the demise of communism. And, you know, and there will be folks who will go around and buy that nonsense. And obviously, if you take any critical analysis, you wonder whether communism existed in the Soviet Union or whether some of the top echelons were not as much capitalist
Oh, it
as
was the
George
states.
Bush's son.
I think it was a state capitalism
Yeah.
that they had there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another point that I think probably I would have to make is the fact that all of the institutions, I find it appalling how the so-called churches and synagogues go right along with the program.
The moral arbitrators.
Yes, and yeah, exactly, and are an integral part of the system. I remember when I did what all the masses are doing in a book, A Black Priest, White Church, and look, because I am a Catholic priest, at the racism or white supremacy that permeates the Catholic Church from top to bottom. And not only inside, but its upholding of this. Outside of the church and the institutions in the world, even the recent verbiage of the Pope in regard to Cuba shows you exactly that was not the conclusion of serious theology or biblical understanding, was simply a conclusion based on the economics and politics of the world as it exists now, with George Bush, the murderer, butcher, bully boy. So that when you find that churches have gone along because they have become as capitalistic as anybody else.
Just go along to get along.
And they didn't.
And it would make, I don't know, I don't want to put words in his mouth, God rest it, but it would make the Lord of Jesus of Nazareth turn over in his grave to see some of the things that are being done in his name. Don't you think?
Yeah, well.
Yeah, you think that, right? I believe it's true.
If he came back in the flesh tomorrow, the first thing he would do is obliterate 99.9% of the folks who claim that they're Christians.
He might throw a lot of those, but you think that, right? Is that, that's
Yeah.
true. And yet there is a core of morality that we can repair to, and obviously you do, and that is important. you know.
Exactly.
And Malcolm found it in Islam. Many people do find it, and at the core of these there is a sense of justice and equity that is there. And we want to keep faith with those things that we can keep faith with out of our historical tradition, which can give us some hope.
But that means going to the core principle as opposed to dealing with the people who claim that they are what they have. You know, it's like taking democracy on the basis of the behavior of this country.
Right.
You know, it's ridiculous. Unless you had some clear notion or concept of what democracy really is. If you bought that democracy is represented by the thinking, the choices, and the behavior of this country, well, then you're crazy. Just like, again, unless you have some clear understanding of fundamental Christian principles, and biblical principles, but you didn't have that, but you took as what Christianity is truly about, namely the vast majority of those who claim to be Christians, or those who claim to be Muslims, or those who claim to be followers, you go bananas because there's no resemblance. It's a real dilemma. We want to take examples from where we can, and I think each of us can say we also take an example in a certain sense from we've all been in certain contents with the country of Libya, which seems to have been able to advance sociologically and politically. They got these people's congresses. And Mr. Gaddafi, who we have scapegoated tremendously in this country, has said the world's got to move from when there were dynastic monarchies to the era of the republics that we are in now, representative democracy, which isn't very representative of a lot of us. That's right.
True to say? It's representative of a certain group.
In fact, you know,
probably always has been.
The irony of the thing, if you took countries like Libya and Gaddafi, took countries like Cuba and Castro, where we vilify and call all kinds of names, talk about communists and so forth, it's very interesting. Not that there's saints over in paradise, but if you were to look at their systems and institutions, they're far more in keeping with basic Judeo-Christian principles, which we pay lip service to, period.
Could I add to that Judeo-Christian Islamic? Or
Islamic,
is that fair
sure. No,
Judeo-Christian Islamic?
Islamic, yes, because
Islam is important for us.
It sure is. And in fact, I'm not surprised at that because, let's face it, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all come out fundamentally from an African context anyway.
That's true fact.
You know, so you're not surprised to find that when you talk about the fundamental principles, which none of us follow, that they are there.
We all come out of Africa. DNA research shows that we all began, if they're right, and I think I buy into it, the theory of the DNA geneticists, that all human beings are descended of one person, and that she was in Africa, and we came out of Africa about 200,000 years ago, and all of us 5.5 billion human beings are descended of this one person. It's kind of sobering to think of that in a certain sense. Out of Africa is where we're all from. Everything comes from there in a certain sense. But this thing with Gaddafi, again, is he says we went from monarchies to this representative democracy, which in our economy, William Grider has showed it clearly, is just big money, which is what he's representing now and so forth. Exactly. And he said we got to go to the era of the masses, the Jamahiriya, they call it in Arabic, and that the masses have to be involved. And don't you think the fact that Mr. Perot got such a response, or anyone who stood up as a third force was able to get such a tremendous response from so many people, not only the poor and the poorest, but even now into the middle classes. Some of these computer systems begin to start attacking their job security and so forth, too. That there has to be some sort of a change.
The only danger is once they begin to understand what this means, a lot of them, see, it sounds attractive now, but once folks begin to understand that the privileged position, the caste position of individuals is going to disappear, they're not going to be so enthused about that as the war. Secondly, in regard to Perot, I'm glad of much of what he said, but at the same time, when you analyze his own background and how he became the billionaire that he is today, you know, it's going to take a real conversion in the biblical sense of the word to say that this is the man who's going to do the kind of things.
I don't think I was reacting so much to what he said or did himself as a man, but the reaction of so many people
to what
and the demonstration of such basic discontent by people who you wouldn't expect
to be. Truth is objective.
Yeah, all right.
Truth is objective.
All right.
That Perot said, look, Bush, Quayle, Reaganomics, et cetera, has caused this state of affairs.
Yeah.
This state of affairs for the majority of people.
Yeah.
The majority
That's
of
what I'm
people.
saying. He wasn't
you see?
Yeah.
So that, and the majority of people said, you're absolutely right.
Right, Mr. P.
Supply side, demand side, Reaganomics, almost recession, not yet, privatization, we're going to get rid of big government, you know, we're gonna decontrol AT&T and et cetera, and we're gonna have massive free competition, et cetera.
Yeah.
People can look and see the state of affairs. Perot, in terms of his own rise and how he made his billions, right? Looked at concrete reality, orchestrated a army, troop, friends, whatever, right? Laid out a strategy and became a billionaire. By the same token, he said, look, at what's happening, what you have to do, if you really want to change it, right, is to marshal all of these people.
The masses.
Right, no question. You see? And people said that's true.
Grumblings in the clubs.
People said that's true.
Brandy's going to get upset.
Right, because, and I'm saying that all he did was articulate objective reality, okay? Because that's how he made his money. Could he embody the leadership of that? Of course not. His perspective was individualism. He's a billionaire.
Yeah, he is.
Not him and the hundreds of thousands of people he wanted to represent. He's a billionaire.
Yeah, he is.
So the tricks remain throughout. But one of the things that we cannot back away from is that it is an objective fact of history that the analysis that Gaddafi makes.
Well, Gaddafi,
in terms of this era, is plain. I mean, there's no place
it's plain to you and I and Father Lucas, who may have had some connection with that. A lot of the people may not. They actually have these people's congresses. 2,000 people's congresses, and the whole nation meets in town meetings like Mr. Perot was talking about. And also, as Father Lucas and I were talking earlier, they do have a private sector there. And they can have private property ownership of a business if somebody wants to start one. But they've set up the rule they can't pay any wages. And anyone that's involved in that private sector business, private sector, private property sector, has to be a partner or an owner of that
business.
So if we're coming into a technologically productive capability where technology and robotics, microprocessor, tremendous productive capability. We don't want to lose the potentiality that our technological capability can bring life support to all of the people of the world. We need that. There's great material want and need. But we can't allow that the ownership of all that technological productivity be left in the hands of so few. We got to spread ownership of some of that to greater numbers of people. Don't you think? It seems to me that's one important aspect of Mr. Gaddafi. They spread the ownership.
And that's why people like Gaddafi and Castro are so bad in the eyes of this country.
Sure, that's a fundamentally opposite position.
Well, I'm not so familiar with Mr. Castro, whether or not Mr. Castro maintains that. See, that's what they've been fighting about, this institution of private property. If people are going to be able to have, in Libya, they have private property, they maintain that. But the thing is, they let everybody get a hold of it. We've got these small things happening in this country, ESOPs, employee stock, ownership plans, and there's a whole system behind that where the ownership begins to of the robots begins to get spread out among some of the people so that income can be distributed to them by something other than minimum wages or minimum wages or even those kind of middle-class surrogate robot functions so many people are now performing that are being threatened by expert systems and other things. They should spread ownership as a way of distributing income.
The point I was
do you think?
Or
am I off base?
No, I think you're absolutely right. The point I was implying by naming Castro, too, is that it seems to be that any world leader or any country that this country cannot stand and making entrees in order to try to invade, to get in or destroy, or those countries where you have progress being made in the direct contrary to the greed and capitalism of this country.
That's a great indication. The degree to which we're against them,
is
they're probably good.
If this country
the degree
hates
to
them,
which we support them, they're probably bad. A friend of mine told me that, and it's a pretty good guide. Unfortunate, which brings it back to the United States again, and the fact that we may be very well heading, if there is not some addressing of this by somebody responsible or something, we might be heading for revolutionary conditions in many different senses of that word, because there's only, we had this thing, didn't we, in Los Angeles?
We got the conditions,
and
but
I mean,
we need the information and the people to realize it. But I think the conditions are already here. And for a real serious, it's just that we brainwash so many folks. They don't know, they don't understand, and many don't want to know or understand because they're afraid of.
Sure.
And unfortunately, it seems to me that unfortunately the people that have all that power, it must be awesome to have the kind of power in a material sense that those leadership elements that own all that property and all that wealth and have all those military resources at their hand. And it gets particularly awesome, almost cosmically so, when you think that the ability to destroy our species, which we couldn't do in the Second War, we couldn't do in the Korean War, the Vietnam, even probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago, is now down in the hands of one or two, maybe one person, leadership element of the world, is pretty existentially awesome that we've abrogated that kind of power to them. And if they begin to get into a sense of a corner, it's pretty dangerous at an existential level with the tremendous Promethean capability that we do have. And the major threat to the continuation of the species on this planet is our own country. It's right here in our very own country.
This country right now could destroy all of civilization 12 times over.
And seemingly only this country has that kind of power that's being able to do that, And they're moving in the wrong direction. There needs to be some, before they can move in the right, there needs to be some destabilization of the complacency with which people accept the normal everyday realities, don't you think?
No question about it, which again brings us to what is the role of the conscious element? What is the role of the progressive element, you see? And how is it that you express your faith in the masses of people? And that is, information is key. The challenge at every level to this power must happen. The regard for one's own personal safety and one's own personal desire not to go to jail and be labeled a terrorist, et cetera, notwithstanding. You have a responsibility, if you're conscious, to challenge at every level, you see, the existence of such a group of such a capability
Yes.
to reap the kind of havoc upon the world that this group who's in power has. And I think that those of us who do it, you see, must understand the vilification that's coming, the attempt always at criminalizing,
Yes.
that Gaddafi and Fidel Castro, regardless to whether or not we want to deal with the contradictions in his country, that Fidel, Gaddafi, and any leader who says that we will determine what's happening here, that yes, you are incorrect, your trade agreements, your disregard for international law, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, your imposition of your form of government around the world, that's incorrect. They become instant criminals. They become terrorists. They become the devil incarnate, you see? We suffer the same fate, those of us who say the same kinds of things here.
And we mustn't allow ourselves to be intimidated.
Right.
Must not.
Exactly.
Must
Exactly.
not.
And if it were also these people that are in the world entities now, the Spirit of Jesus marches with us in this, I would say.
Absolutely.
The sense of justice, the call for justice
Absolutely.
from all of our major religious traditions call
Absolutely.
upon this. And it calls upon all of us to try and find some sort of a solution out of this, because of the fact, again, the existential condition we are in is one that is unique in human history, and we just can't allow a fundamentally unjust system to continue.
And we won't.
We won't. You have basically optimistic, right?
Oh,
basically
absolutely.
optimistic, Father
No
Lucas?
Yes.
question about
Yes.
it.
Despite the difficulty,
Despite the difficulty.
the moral principle will out.
I think
and
so, yeah.
we'll do it because it could be a golden renaissance, a golden age of harmony that could be the natural outcome of the adverse side of the destructive scenario. It may be birth pangs of our suffering, some sort of new liberated condition that's appropriate in terms of the
I
broader
may not
evolution
be
of
alive to
events.
see it, but it's got to come.
But we've got to find. Not if
Oh,
we-
I'm gonna
even
be
if we
alive.
don't
I'm not
see
gonna
it,
be anywhere.
we
Well, you're
see.
much younger than I am.
Yeah, well, that's true. I'm younger than you. I mean, I'm older than you. But we may not see it, but we may see the way to it.
Yes.
Exactly.
Is something that we might be working
Exactly.
toward. And that's the duty we have now. And we're running right out of time. I'm sorry. We're running
Oh,
right
it's
out
very
of time.
good.
We want to let the people know how to get in touch with Arm the Masses. So we're going to put up again, once again, the newspaper, Arm the Masses. And our guests have been on my far left, Viola Plumer. And on my immediate left is Father Lucas. And happy to have been able to bring you those perceptions. We'll give an address how they can get in touch with the paper. People should read it and be armed with good knowledge. Happy to have been able to bring you those perceptions. We in Conversations invite you to tune in again next week. We'll be coming back with more next week here on Conversations. So that's it for now. That's it. Thank you very much. Good night. And once again, thank you for coming in.
Thank you very
Good night.
much.
We'll see you next week. Good night.